Have you ever been judged unfairly in a single searing moment? Judged not for who you are, but for what someone assumes you are. We're about to tell you the story of a first-class flight, a decorated CEO and a flight attendant whose career was flying high on prejudice. She made the mistake of her life when she looked at a black woman in seat 2A and called her staff. But what she didn't know, what no one on that plane could have possibly guessed, was that in a few short hours, that same passenger wouldn't just be filing a complaint. She would be the one signing the entire airline's paychecks. Stay with us as we unpack the story of how a single act of bias led to an entire corporate empire being turned upside down. The first-class Polaris lounge at San Francisco International Airport was a sanctuary of hushed tones and muted clinks of crystal on marble. It was an ecosystem built on the unspoken currency of status. Here, men in bespoke suits whispered into their phones about multi-million-dollar mergers, and women with timeless elegance sipped champagne, their quiet confidence a testament to their place in the world. And then there was Dr. Vivian James, seated in a secluded leather armchair by the panoramic window overlooking the ballet of aircraft on the tarmac. At 34, she commanded attention without demanding it. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal grey pantsuit, her hair styled in elegant microlocks, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs, she radiated an aura of intense focus. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't working. She was simply observing her mind, a supercomputer processing the world around her, a habit from her days coding in a stuffy dorm room that had never quite left her, even now as the CEO and chief architect of Etheria Dynamics, one of Silicon Valley's most explosive AI firms. Etheria wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. Vivian's proprietary algorithms were reshaping industries from logistics to predictive medicine. She was the ghost in the machine of the new economy, a visionary whose name was spoken with a mixture of awe and envy in boardrooms across the globe. But here in the anonymous luxury of the lounge, she was just a passenger awaiting her flight to New York. She was flying to JFK to finalize the largest, most secretive acquisition in her company's history. It was a hostile takeover executed with the silent, surgical precision of her own AI. The target was a behemoth, Global Horizon, Holdings a sprawling conglomerate with interests in logistics, hospitality, and most notably, commercial aviation, through its flagship subsidiary, Stratos Airlines. The deal was so confidential that not even the CEO of Global Horizon knew the name of his company's new master. He just knew the offer was too overwhelming to refuse. Vivian was flying on one of her own newly acquired planes and didn't even know it yet. The ink was still drying. A polite announcement echoed through the lounge, calling for priority boarding for Stratos Airlines flight SA-7012 to New York. Vivian closed her laptop, slipped it into her sleek leather carry-on, and stood. She moved with an unhurried grace, a quiet dignity that was entirely her own. As she presented her boarding pass, the gate agent's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Welcome, Dr. James. We have you in 2A. Please enjoy your flight." Vivian offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you. I will." Stepping onto the aircraft was like entering another world. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737 was an oasis of privacy and comfort. Pod-like seats, fine bedding, and a quiet, efficient energy. She settled into her seat 2A, a window seat on the port side. She was an engineer at heart and still loved the simple magic of watching the world shrink beneath her as the powerful engines defied gravity. As other passengers filed in, she noticed an elderly woman in the seat across the aisle 2B, struggling to lift her small carry-on into the overhead compartment. The woman, perhaps in her late 70s, was frail, her hands trembling slightly. The flight attendants were busy at the galley, their backs turned. Without a second thought, Vivian unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and approached the woman. "May I help you with that?" she asked, her voice calm and warm. The woman looked up, relieved. "Oh, would you? Thank you so much, dear. My arthritis is acting up today." "It's no trouble at all," Vivian said. She effortlessly lifted the bag and secured it in the bin, ensuring it was snug and safe. "You're a lifesaver," the woman sighed, settling back into her seat. "They're usually so helpful, the girls who work on these planes." Vivian simply smiled and returned to her seat, buckling herself in, just as a flight attendant bustled down the aisle. This flight attendant was a woman in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe tight bun and a name tag that read Brenda. Her smile was plastered on a professional veneer that didn't quite reach her sharp, assessing eyes. She moved with an air of proprietary authority, as if this cabin were her personal fiefdom. Her gaze swept over the passengers, cataloguing them before it landed on Vivian. She had seen Vivian help the older woman. She saw a black woman in a simple pantsuit out of her seat and attending to another passenger. And in that moment, Brenda's mind, clouded by years of ingrained assumptions and petty resentments, made a fatal leap of logic. She didn't see a CEO, a doctor of computer science, or even a paying first-class passenger. She saw someone who, in her worldview, didn't belong there, unless she was working. She strode over to Vivian's seat, stopping so close that Vivian had to look up. Brenda leaned in her voice, a stage whisper, designed to be heard by those nearby. "Honey," she began the term of endearment, dripping with condescension. "The crew briefing was 30 minutes ago. All staff are supposed to be in the galley preparing for takeoff, not sitting here with the passengers. Where is your uniform?" The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. The cabin, which had been filled with the low hum of conversation and preparation, suddenly felt silent. The businessman in 1A lowered his newspaper. The elderly woman in 2B looked over confused. Vivian felt a familiar cold prickle run down her spine. It was the sting of being miscategorized, of being reduced to a stereotype in a single ignorant sentence. For a moment, the brilliant mind that could design world-changing algorithms went perfectly still. She looked up at Brenda, her expression unreadable, a mask of calm composure solidifying over the flash of insult. The storm had just made landfall. Time seemed to slow in the pressurized cabin of Flight SA-712. Brenda Finch stood there, arms crossed, a smug little smirk playing on her lips, waiting for the young woman in seat 2A to scurry off to the galley where she presumably belonged. She was used to being in charge, to correcting minor infractions, and this felt like just another one, a new hire perhaps on a deadhead flight who didn't know the rules. Vivian James held Brenda's gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the silence stretch, forcing the flight attendant to remain in her accusatory posture. Every tick of the clock was another drop of acid on Brenda's certainty. The businessman in 1A, a man named Robert Chen, who had done business with Etheria Dynamics, was now staring openly, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He recognized Dr. James, but was so stunned by the flight attendant's audacity that he remained momentarily speechless. Finally, Vivian spoke. Her voice was low-measured and devoid of the anger that was simmering just beneath the surface. It was the voice she used to dismantle faulty arguments in boardrooms, a voice of pure, unassailable logic. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said clearly. "My seat is 2A. My boarding pass, which your colleague scanned not 5 minutes ago, confirms that. I am a passenger." Brenda's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Being wrong-footed was not an experience she enjoyed. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down her prejudice, seeking justification. "Well," Brenda sniffed her eyes, raking over Vivian's simple pantsuit, a stark contrast to the designer labels on some of the other women in the cabin. It was an easy mistake to make. You were up and serving another passenger. The implication was clear. People like you serve. People like me are served. The insult was no longer just an assumption. It was now a judgment on her appearance, her race, and her place in the world. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts delivered in a single sentence. "I was assisting a fellow passenger," Vivian corrected her, her tone remaining unnervingly calm. "It's called basic human decency. You might want to familiarize yourself with it. It's often a key component of actual customer service." A small gasp came from the elderly woman in 2B. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. Humiliated and angry, she saw her authority being challenged. "There's no need to be rude," Brenda snapped her voice, rising in volume. "I am the lead flight attendant in this cabin. I am responsible for safety and order here. And I am the passenger you have just publicly insulted." Vivian replied, her gaze like ice. "So perhaps you can exercise that responsibility by returning to your duties and allowing me to enjoy the flight I've paid a significant amount of money for." By now, the commotion had attracted another flight attendant, a younger, less severe-looking woman named Linda. She scurried over her expression, anxious. "Brenda, is everything all right?" "This passenger was being disruptive," Brenda said, twisting the narrative instantly. It was a classic power play frame, the victim as the aggressor. Robert Chen in 1A finally found his voice. "That's an absolute falsehood," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority he himself possessed as a venture capitalist. "I saw the entire exchange. This lady," he gestured to Vivian, "was kind enough to help another passenger. Your attendant here accosted her and made a frankly racist assumption." The word racist hung in the air like a foul odor. Linda paled. Brenda, however, puffed up with indignation. "I am not a racist," she declared, her voice now far too loud for the cabin. "I have been flying for 20 years. I treat everyone the same." Vivian knew this was a critical juncture. She could escalate demand to see the captain and create a scene that would delay the flight and achieve little more than a temporary, insincere apology. Or she could play the long game. She had learned long ago that the most devastating power is the power that is held in reserve, applied with precision at the right time and place. A public spectacle was not her style. A systemic demolition, however, was her specialty. She held up a hand, a simple, disarming gesture that somehow silenced the cabin. "It's fine," she said, her voice now softer, almost weary. She looked directly at Brenda, but her words were for everyone. "The situation is resolved. The flight attendant made a mistake. I'm sure she will be more careful with her assumptions in the future." She then turned her gaze to Brenda, and for the first time, a sliver of the steel beneath her calm exterior showed. "Won't you, Brenda?" She used her name deliberately. It was a small act, but it shifted the power dynamic completely. She was no longer an anonymous passenger. She was a person who had taken note. She had seen the name tag. She was collecting data. Brenda caught between the eyes of the other passengers, and the unexpected composure of her target could only stammer. Yes, of course." She was flustered, defeated, but not repentant. The humiliation had curdled into a deep, sullen resentment. She shot Vivian a venomous look before turning on her heel and marching back to the galley, Linda trailing nervously in her wake. As Vivian settled back into her seat and picked up the in-flight magazine, she appeared to the outside world to be the picture of tranquility. But inside, the gears were turning. The emotional sting was already being converted into actionable data points. Lead flight attendant, Brenda Finch. Flight SA72 SFO to JFK. Date August 28, 2025. Witness Robert Chen Seat 1A. Complicit junior attendant Linda. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a systems analyst who had just discovered a critical flaw in the operating code of her newest, most expensive asset. And she was already designing the patch. It would be elegant, comprehensive, and permanent. Brenda Finch had no idea that her petty prejudice hadn't just ruined a passenger's morning. It had just triggered a root-level diagnostic on her entire career and the company she worked for. The plane hadn't even left the gate, but for Brenda, the descent had already begun. As Flight SA712 climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, an uneasy peace settled over the first-class cabin. The physical turbulence was non-existent. The atmosphere, however, was thick with unspoken tension. Vivian put on her noise-cancelling headphones, not to listen to music, but to create a barrier, a visible sign that she was not to be disturbed. She opened a file on her laptop, a complex projection of market synergies, but her mind was elsewhere. She replayed the incident, dissecting it. It wasn't the overt, screaming bigotry of the past. It was something more insidious, the casual, ingrained prejudice of low expectations, the easy assumption that a black woman in a simple suit couldn't possibly belong in a space of power and privilege. It was a bias she had fought her entire life, from professors who discouraged her from advanced mathematics to investors who condescendingly asked if she was the marketing girl at her own pitch meetings. Each instance had been a whetstone, sharpening her resolve, hardening her focus. This was no different. It was just another data point in a very large, very frustrating set. In the galley, Brenda Finch was fuming. "Can you believe the nerve of her?" she vented to Linda, furiously polishing a glass that was already spotless. Getting all high and mighty, and that man in 1A sticking his nose in. "Racist," he called me. "I'm the least racist person I know." Linda, who knew Brenda's long history of off-color remarks and complaints from passengers of color that were always expertly smoothed over, stayed quiet. She just wanted the flight to end. "Maybe you should just apologize, Brenda. Properly, for the misunderstanding." "Apologize for what?" "For doing my job." Brenda scoffed, slamming the glass down. She was trying to make a scene. You know how they can be always looking for a handout, a lawsuit. She's probably hoping for a voucher for a free flight. This was the narrative Brenda was constructing, one that painted her as the victim of a manipulative, overly sensitive passenger. It was a comfortable fiction, and she clung to it. The meal service began. When Linda approached Vivian's seat, she was overly solicitous, her voice trembling slightly. "Dr. James, can I get you anything to drink before the meal? A glass of champagne, perhaps?" Vivian lowered her headphones. She noted Linda's use of her title. Robert Chen must have spoken to the crew. She gave a small, polite nod. "Just sparkling water with lime, thank you, Linda." When it was Brenda's turn to serve the main course, the mask of professionalism was back, but it was brittle. She placed the pan-seared salmon in front of Vivian without a word, her movements stiff and resentful. There was no "enjoy your meal," no pleasantry. It was a calculated act of passive aggression. Vivian ignored it. She ate her meal slowly, methodically. She was not going to give Brenda the satisfaction of a reaction. Her power lay in her absolute refusal to be drawn into Brenda's petty drama. An hour later, seeking to stretch his legs, Robert Chen walked past the galley on his way to the lavatory. He saw Brenda speaking in hushed, animated tones with the co-pilot who had come back for a coffee. As Chen passed, he caught a snippet of their conversation. "Claims I called her staff," Brenda was saying, rolling her eyes. "She's making a huge deal out of nothing. You know how it is." The co-pilot, a man named Paul, chuckled. "Don't worry about it, Bren. We'll back you up in the flight report. Passenger became agitated over a minor misunderstanding. Standard procedure. Corporate will just send her a form letter and a $100 voucher. It'll go away. Robert Chen's blood ran cold. He was witnessing the system in action, the closing of ranks, the dismissal of a legitimate complaint, the institutional gaslighting. He continued to the lavatory, and on his way back he paused at Vivian's seat. She looked up from her screen. "Dr. James," he said, quietly, leaning down slightly. "I don't mean to disturb you, but I feel you should know. I just overheard the lead attendant and the co-pilot in the galley. They're planning to file a report that frames you as the aggressor." Vivian's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened, almost imperceptibly. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Chen. I appreciate your integrity." "It's appalling," he continued, his voice low with anger. "If there's anything I can do, a statement I can provide. Your testimony as a witness will be very valuable." Vivian said, a hint of something complex and strategic in her voice. "But not to the airline's customer service department. That won't be necessary." Chen was puzzled by her phrasing, but recognized the quiet finality in her tone. He nodded and returned to his seat, feeling as though he had just witnessed the opening move in a chess game where one player had no idea they were even on the board. For the rest of the flight, Vivian worked. But she wasn't analyzing market synergies anymore. She had drafted a new email on her encrypted server, addressed to her personal legal counsel and her newly appointed head of transitional operations for the Global Horizon acquisition. The subject line was simple: Project Phoenix Phase 1. The body of the email was brief and precise. Initiate immediate deep dive audit of all HR complaint records, passenger feedback and legal disputes for Stratos Airlines dating back 10 years. Flag all incidents involving accusations of discrimination, racial gender age. Cross-reference flight crew names to identify patterns. Assemble a third-party DEI diversity, equity and inclusion task force. They are to be ready for an on-site deployment at SA headquarters, effective 0900 Monday. Cancel the scheduled welcome town hall. Replace it with a mandatory all-hands emergency meeting for all senior management and JFK-based flight crews. I will be leading the meeting myself. She hit send just as the pilot announced their initial descent into New York. Below them, the lights of the city twinkled like a vast circuit board. For most people, it was the end of a journey. For Vivian James, it was the beginning of a system-wide reboot. And for Brenda Finch and her complicit co-pilot, basking in the false security of their planned flight report, the ground was rushing up to meet them far faster than they could ever imagine. While Flight SA-720 was cruising over the continental United States, a very different kind of turbulence was hitting the executive floor of the Global Horizon Holdings Tower in Manhattan. Gregory Davenport, the longtime CEO of Stratos Airlines, paced his cavernous office, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. For a week, he had known his parent company was being acquired. What he didn't know was by whom. The deal had been a corporate blitzkrieg, a mysterious, monstrously high offer from a privately held entity, known only as Phoenix Capital. No negotiations, no schmoozing, just a number so compelling that the Global Horizon Board had capitulated in less than 48 hours. The secrecy was unnerving. Gregory was a man who thrived on connections, on knowing who was who. This anonymity felt like a personal affront. "Anything yet, Cynthia?" he barked into his intercom. His executive assistant's voice came back strained. "Nothing yet, Mr. Davenport. We're still being told all communications will come directly from Phoenix Capital's transition team after the market closes today." Gregory slumped into his high-backed leather chair, which suddenly felt less like a throne and more like an electric chair. He was 62, a company man his whole life, a titan of the airline industry. He was old school, believing in handshakes, backroom deals, and the established order of things. This new way, silent, digital, ruthlessly efficient, felt alien and threatening. His airline was his baby. He'd weathered 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, and a global pandemic. To lose control now to an unknown entity was galling. His phone buzzed. It was a calendar alert. Cancelled Welcome Phoenix Capital Town Hall meeting. New mandatory emergency all-hands meeting, 9:00 a.m. Monday. "Cynthia," he roared, "who authorized this change?" "It came directly from the Phoenix transition team, sir. It says all senior VPs, directors, and all JFK-based flight crews currently on rotation are required to attend. No exceptions." Requiring flight crews to attend a corporate meeting was unheard of. Pilots, flight attendants, they were operational staff managed by their own unions and supervisors. Bringing them into a high-level strategy meeting was bizarre. It felt like a power play, a deliberate disruption of his carefully maintained hierarchy. A deep sense of foreboding washed over him. Whoever Phoenix Capital was, they didn't play by the established rules. Meanwhile, in a temporary command center, set up in a discreet Wall Street law office, Vivian's team was executing her orders. Project Phoenix was in full swing, her head of transitional ops, a sharp-witted woman named Ava Chen. Robert Chen's cousin, a fact unknown to everyone but Vivian, who valued talent and loyalty above all, directed a team of data analysts and legal experts. "The directive from Dr. James is clear," Ava announced, her voice cutting through the hum of servers. "We are stress-testing the internal culture of Stratus Airlines, starting with their HR complaint system. I want every discrimination complaint from the last decade past categorized and cross-referenced by tonight. I want to know which names keep popping up. I want to know how many complaints were dismissed, how many resulted in settlements with non-disclosure agreements, and how many were simply lost." The analyst's fingers flew across their keyboards. They were her digital SEAL team, breaching the firewalls and antiquated databases of Stratos Airlines with surgical precision. Within hours, patterns began to emerge. A graph on the main screen began to populate with names. Some appeared once or twice. A few appeared 5 or 6 times. One name began to blink red, an alert triggered by the sheer volume of flags. "I've got a hot one," an analyst called out. "Lead flight attendant Brenda Finch, based out of JFK. 18 complaints filed against her over 12 years. 12 of them allege racially biased treatment. 3 resulted in small confidential settlements. The other 9 were dismissed by internal review, all signed off by the same supervisor." "Pull up her flight history," Ava commanded. "I want to know where she is right now." A moment later, the information flashed on the screen. "Currently in the air. Flight SA-72 SFO to JFK. ETA 7:45 p.m. Eastern." Ava looked at the screen, a grim smile touching her lips. She looked at the name of the analyst who had unearthed the data. "Good work, Daniel. Keep digging. The CEO wants a full workup on Finch and her entire chain of command by morning." When Flight SA-712 finally touched down at JFK, the passengers deplaned oblivious to the corporate drama that had unfolded above their heads. Vivian was one of the first to leave, nodding a silent thank you to Robert Chen as she passed his seat. She didn't even glance toward the galley. Brenda Finch, still stewing in her resentment, was completing her post-flight checks. She was looking forward to her 3 days off, to venting to her husband about the awful passenger who had tried to ruin her trip. She checked her work phone for messages. A single high-priority email had come through from corporate. Subject: urgent mandatory attendance required. All JFK-based flight crew members are hereby instructed to attend a mandatory all-hands meeting on Monday, August 31st, at 9:00 a.m. sharp in the main hangar auditorium. No exceptions or substitutions will be permitted. This directive supersedes all previously scheduled duties or leave. Brenda frowned. A mandatory meeting on her day off, and in the main hangar of all places. It was deeply unusual. "Did you see this?" she asked Linda, who was tidying up the cabin. Linda nodded, her expression worried. "The whole crew got it. Paul, the co-pilot, is furious. He had a golf game." "What could possibly be so important?" Brenda grumbled, deleting the email in annoyance. "Probably some new stupid uniform policy. Well, if they're going to drag me in on my day off, they'd better be paying me overtime." She disembarked, stepping out into the bustling terminal of JFK, utterly convinced that she was still in control of her world. She had no idea that her name was currently at the top of a list in a downtown office, a list that would become the centerpiece of a corporate reckoning. She thought she had put a difficult passenger in her place. She couldn't comprehend that the passenger had just bought the plane the airport gate, and the very ground on which the airline's headquarters stood. The silent takeover was complete. The public unveiling was next. Monday morning arrived with a grey, drizzly pall over New York City. The main hangar at the Stratos Airlines JFK hub, usually a cavernous space echoing with the sounds of maintenance and machinery, was filled with a nervous, murmuring crowd of about 500 people. Senior executives in tailored suits stood awkwardly beside pilots in crisp uniforms and flight attendants in their company-issued attire. The air was thick with confusion and speculation. Why were they all here? Why the secrecy? Brenda Finch stood with a small group of her fellow flight attendants, including Linda. She had complained relentlessly about having to come in on her day off. "I'm telling you it's about the merger," she said confidently, sipping a cup of coffee. "The new owners probably want to inspire us. We'll get some boring speech from some guy in a suit we'll never see again, and that'll be it. Total waste of a morning." Linda nervously smoothed her uniform. "I don't know, Brenda. This feels different. Why would they make us come? It's a power move," Brenda dismissed. "They want to show everyone who's boss from day one." On the hastily erected stage at the front of the hangar, Gregory Davenport, CEO of Stratos Airlines, was fidgeting with his tie. He had met the transition team leader, Ava Chen, just an hour before, and the brief, icy meeting had done nothing to calm his nerves. She had given him a simple instruction. "You will introduce the new chairman and CEO of our parent company. Nothing more." The lights in the hangar dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Gregory stepped up to the podium, the spotlight making him sweat. "Good morning," he began, his voice strained. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice. As you know, our parent company, Global Horizon Holdings, has entered a new chapter. It has been acquired by a new entity. This acquisition represents a bold new future for Stratos Airlines." He was reading from a card, his words hollow and rehearsed. "The leadership of our new parent company is here today to address you directly. It is my duty to introduce you to the visionary founder, the chief architect, and the new CEO of the company that now owns us all. Please welcome Dr. Vivian James." The name meant nothing to most people in the room. They expected an older man, another Gregory Davenport, to walk out. Instead, a side door opened, and Vivian James walked onto the stage. She was not dressed in the power suit they might have expected. She wore simple, elegant black trousers, a silk shell top, and a blazer that draped perfectly over her frame. She moved with the same quiet, unhurried grace she had on the plane. She looked out over the sea of faces, her expression calm and composed. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Who was this young black woman? Brenda Finch, standing in the middle of the crowd, simply stared. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Her brain struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The woman from 2A, the disruptive passenger, the one she had dismissed as staff. Linda, standing next to her, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Brenda! Oh my God, Brenda! That's her!" Brenda's face went completely white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. Her knees felt weak. The vast hangar suddenly felt small and suffocating, the air too thin to breathe. It was her. The woman. On the stage. And Davenport had just said... He had said she owned them. Vivian reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at her new employees. Her eyes scanned the crowd, methodical and precise, until for a brief, searing moment, they locked with Brenda Finch's. In that instant, Brenda saw no flicker of triumph, no hint of, "I told you so." She saw something far more terrifying indifference, as if Brenda was nothing more than a line of faulty code she was about to delete. "Good morning," Vivian began, her voice, crisp and clear, amplified throughout the massive space. It was the same calm, measured voice from the plane, but now it held the undeniable weight of absolute authority. "My name is Dr. Vivian James. I am the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics. As of Friday at market, Close Etheria completed its acquisition of Global Horizon Holdings. This means that every person in this hangar, every plane in this fleet, every gate at this airport with a Stratos Airlines logo on it is now part of my company." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I did not buy this company for its assets," she continued. "I bought it for its potential. But I have learned in my career that a company's greatest asset is not its planes or its routes. It is its culture. A culture of excellence, a culture of safety, and a culture of respect. Respect for the job, respect for your colleagues, and most importantly, respect for our customers. Every single one of them." Her gaze swept the crowd again. "Unfortunately, I have already learned that this culture is not as strong as it needs to be. Sometimes a system has flaws, sometimes a protocol is weak, and sometimes the problem is with individual components that repeatedly fail, corrupting the system from within." From her position in the crowd, Brenda felt a wave of nausea. Every word was a hammer blow aimed directly at her. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes shifting people in her section who knew she had been on the SFO flight, who had heard her complain about the passenger in 2A. The whispers started a low, snake-like hiss spreading through the hangar. "I was on a flight a few days ago," Vivian said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "Flight SA-712 from San Francisco. And on that flight I had an experience that told me everything I needed to know about the challenges we face. It showed me that some of our staff believe it is acceptable to judge a passenger by the color of their skin. It showed me that some staff believe it is acceptable to mistake a paying customer for a servant. It showed me that when confronted, that same staff would rather lie and close ranks than show a basic level of human and professional decency." She didn't need to say the name. Everyone was looking at Brenda now. The lead flight attendant stood frozen, a statue of pure horror. Her carefully constructed world, her 20 years of seniority, her petty tyrannies in the cabin, it had all just evaporated under the calm, penetrating gaze of the woman she had tried to humiliate. "This is not a warning," Vivian said, her voice hardening to the strength of steel. "This is a promise. The culture of this airline will be rebuilt from the ground up. It will be founded on merit on service and on the unbreakable principle that every single person who steps onto one of our planes is worthy of respect. Those who cannot or will not adapt to this new culture will find that they no longer have a place at Stratos Airlines. The diagnostic is over. The reboot begins now." She held the silence for a moment longer, her authority absolute. Then she gave a slight nod. "Thank you. You may return to your duties." No applause, just a stunned, deathly silence, followed by a cacophony of frantic whispers. Gregory Davenport stood at the side of the stage looking like he had aged a decade, but Brenda Finch didn't move. She couldn't. She was locked in a nightmare of her own making, realizing that the paycheck she was so worried about receiving was from this moment forward signed by the woman she had called Staff, and she had a terrifying certainty that her name would not be on the next one. The emergency meeting was a shockwave, but the tsunami that followed was the internal audit. Vivian James did not operate on emotion or personal vendettas. She operated on data. Her first official act as the ultimate head of Stratos Airlines was not to fire Brenda Finch, but to release the hounds. The third-party DEI task force she had assembled descended upon the corporate headquarters with the quiet efficiency of a forensics team. They were given unrestricted access to everything: HR files, passenger complaint logs, internal emails, and employee testimonials. Ava Chen oversaw the operation, reporting directly and only to Vivian. Gregory Davenport, stripped of his autonomy, was summoned to the executive boardroom on the 50th floor. When he walked in, he found Vivian sitting at the head of his table, her laptop open. Ava Chen stood beside her. There were no pleasantries. "Mr. Davenport." Vivian began, not bothering to look up from her screen. "My team has been analyzing your company's complaint resolution data for the past 72 hours. The results are suboptimal." She turned her laptop around. The screen displayed a complex network graph showing nodes of employee names connected to lines representing formal complaints. Some nodes were small. One, colored in bright crimson, was massive with dozens of lines converging on it. The name next to it was Brenda Finch. 18 formal complaints in 12 years. Vivian stated, her voice flat. 12 alleging racial bias, 2 alleging ageism, all filed by first or business class passengers. Only 3 of these resulted in any action, a minor settlement with an NDA paid for by the company. The other 15 were dismissed. She clicked a key. All 15 dismissals were signed off by the same man, a JFK-based crew supervisor named Michael Robertson. My team's analysis of his records shows that Mr. Robertson has never in his 20-year career substantiated a single claim of racial discrimination made against a flight attendant under his supervision. Statistically, that is not just improbable. It is impossible. It is not a reflection of a flawless crew. It is the sign of a broken system. A system that protects its own at the expense of its customers. Gregory felt the sweat bead on his forehead. I was not aware of the specifics of these individual cases. That is precisely the problem, Mr. Davenport. Vivian cut in her eyes, finally lifting to meet his. They were cold, analytical, and utterly unforgiving. You weren't aware. You fostered a culture where this information never reached you. A culture where a supervisor like Michael Robertson could create a protective bubble for problematic employees. You are the head of the system. Therefore, the failure is yours. Ava Chen slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. This is the preliminary report on Brenda Finch. We conducted confidential interviews with 22 other flight attendants who have worked with her. They speak of a pattern of behavior, derogatory comments about passengers of color, preferential treatment for white male passengers, and a vindictive attitude towards anyone who challenges her. She referred to the economy cabin as the cargo hold, and non-American passengers as illegibles. Gregory opened the folder and paled as he read the anonymized quotes. The reckoning was not confined to the executive suite. Brenda Finch was formally suspended, pending the results of the investigation. She was instructed not to contact any Stratos Airlines employees. The isolation was immediate and absolute. Her friends from the crew lounge suddenly didn't answer her calls. The union representative who spoke to her sounded distant and non-committal, recognizing a lost cause when he saw one. Brenda sat in her suburban Long Island home, the world she had built crumbling around her. Her husband tried to reassure her. "It's a misunderstanding, you'll sue them for wrongful termination." But Brenda knew better. She kept replaying the moment in the hangar when Vivian James's eyes had met hers. There was no anger there. It was the detached look of a scientist observing a failed experiment. You don't get angry at a failed experiment. You just document the results, dismantle it, and move on. 2 days later, she was summoned to an HR office at the JFK hub. It wasn't the cozy, familiar office of her friend, Michael Robertson. He had been suspended as well. This was a sterile, unfamiliar room, occupied by a woman from the third-party task force. The woman was professional detached. She laid out the file, not just the incident on Flight SA-72, everything. The complaint from the black family in 2014, who were accused of causing a disturbance when their child was crying. The complaint from the elderly Asian man in 2017, whom she had berated for not understanding her English quickly enough. The testimony from junior flight attendants, whom she had bullied. It was a meticulous, undeniable mosaic of her prejudice. Given the documented pattern of conduct, the woman said, her voice leaving no room for argument, and the clear violation of the company's code of conduct and anti-discrimination policies, Stratos Airlines is terminating your employment effective immediately. There was no negotiation, no severance package beyond what was legally required. Her company ID was deactivated. Her flight benefits were revoked. 20 years of a career erased in 20 minutes. The karma, however, was not hers alone to bear. The co-pilot Paul, whose casual dismissal of the incident had been noted by Robert Chen, who had at Vivian's request submitted a detailed signed statement, was demoted to first officer and assigned to a year of flying undesirable domestic routes. He was also required to lead mandatory sensitivity training sessions for new pilots, a humiliating reminder of his failure. Linda, for her complicity and failure to de-escalate, received a formal reprimand on her record and was barred from working in premium cabins for 2 years. For Gregory Davenport, the end was more dignified, but no less absolute. Vivian gave him a choice. He could be fired, his legacy forever tainted by the scandal of the culture he oversaw, or he could announce his immediate retirement for personal reasons and go quietly. He chose retirement. His departure was announced at the end of the week, framed as the graceful exit of a respected veteran passing the torch to a new generation. Only he and Vivian knew the truth. He hadn't passed the torch. It had been taken from him. The reckoning was complete. It had been swift, systematic, and devastating. Vivian had not just fired one flight attendant. She had ripped out the rot from the roots, the complicit supervisors, the indifferent executives, the entire system that had allowed a Brenda Finch to flourish for 2 decades. It was a masterclass in consequence. 3 months later, Stratos Airlines was a company reborn. The name was the same, the livery on the planes was the same, but the soul of the corporation had been fundamentally altered. Vivian James had appointed a new dynamic CEO, a woman renowned for her expertise in logistics and corporate culture transformation. The entire senior management team had been overhauled. The changes were not just at the top. The Project Phoenix audit had led to the most comprehensive DEI initiative in the industry's history. Recruitment practices were revamped to attract more diverse talent. Training programs were redesigned, moving from bland check-the-box videos to immersive scenario-based workshops on unconscious bias and conflict resolution. A new, truly anonymous reporting system, managed by an external body, was implemented, ensuring that no complaint could ever be buried by a biased supervisor again. The story of Flight SA-712 became a legend within the company, a cautionary tale, and a founding myth for the new Stratos Airlines. It was spoken of in hushed tones in break rooms and training sessions. It was a stark reminder that every passenger, regardless of their appearance, could be anyone. More importantly, it was a reminder that every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity, full stop. Vivian, having set the transformation in motion, had stepped back from the airline's day-to-day operations, focusing once more on the far-reaching goals of ethereal dynamics. Her work with Stratos was a case study in her overarching philosophy: you don't just fix a single bug. You rewrite the entire operating system to be more efficient, more ethical, and more robust. One crisp autumn evening, she was flying back to San Francisco. She was, of course, flying on Stratos Airlines, seated once again in 2A. The first-class cabin was buzzing with a quiet, professional energy. The lead flight attendant, a sharp, kind-faced man in his 30s named David, approached her seat. "Dr. James," he said with a warm, genuine smile, "it is an absolute honor to have you on board with us today. Can I get you a glass of water before we take off?" "Sparkling with lime, please, David, and thank you." She replied, her own smile genuine. As he went to the galley, a young black woman, a newly hired flight attendant, was walking down the aisle, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She saw an older gentleman struggling with his coat and immediately paused. "Allow me to help you with that, sir," she offered warmly. She took his coat, folded it carefully, and stowed it for him. The gesture was effortless, gracious, and imbued with a simple, profound respect. Vivian watched the exchange, and for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of deep, quiet satisfaction. The system was working. The culture was changing. It wasn't about revenge. It had never been about revenge. It was about ensuring that no one else would ever have to endure that cold, familiar sting of being made to feel like they didn't belong. The plane pushed back from the gate, its powerful engines spooling up as it accelerated down the runway and lifted gracefully into the darkening sky. Vivian looked out the window at the sprawling city lights below. She had faced down prejudice and power structures her entire life. She had learned how to dismantle them, not with anger, but with brilliance, not with a shout, but with the silent, unstoppable force of consequence. She hadn't just bought an airline. She had bought it a new horizon, one where the sky was truly open to everyone. And for her, that was the only kind of success that truly mattered. And that's where our story ends. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't the power they have, but how they choose to use it. Dr. Vivian James could have sought simple revenge, but instead she chose radical transformation. She turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systemic change, proving that the most effective response to prejudice isn't just to call it out, but to tear out its roots. This story, while dramatic, mirrors real-life struggles and triumphs that happen every day. It's about karma, yes, but it's also about the quiet strength and strategic brilliance that so often go unseen. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more stories like this one, coming, stories that make you think, that challenge perceptions, and that celebrate the underdog finally getting their day. Thanks for listening.